Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayam Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivaraja Kacharya Stokta Srimad His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Anantakoti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Sikho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Ki Jai Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakund Radhakund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai Ganga Mai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai Tulsi Maharani Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Garanga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 9, text number 33. I think you did this one yesterday, but there was a very long purport. So we're going to continue the purport today. But we'll do the verse again. Aham, evāsam, evāgre, aham evāsam evāgre, nānyad, yat, sad-asat, param, nānyad, yat, sad-asat, param, paścād, aham, yad, etac, paścād, aham, yad, etac, yo vaśiṣyeta, sosmi aham, yo vaśiṣyeta, sosmi aham, aham evāsam evāgre, nānyad, yat, sad-asat, param, paścād, aham, yat, etac, yo vaśiṣyeta, aham, aham evāsam evāgre, nānyad, yat, sad-asat, param, paścād, aham, yad, etac, yo vaśiṣyeta, aham, aham evāsam evāgre, nānyad, yat, sad-asat, param, paścād, aham, yad, etac, yo vaśiṣyeta, aham. Ladies? Aham, I, the personality of Godhead. Certainly, āsam existed, only, agre before the creation, never, anyat anything else, yat all those, sat the effect, asat the cause, param the supreme, paścāt at the end, aham I, the personality of Godhead, yat all these, etat creation, cha also, yah everything, avaśiṣyeta remains, sa that, asmi I am, aham I, the personality of Godhead. Translation, Brahmā, it is I, the personality of Godhead, who was existing before the creation, when there was nothing but myself, nor was there the material nature, the cause of this creation. That which you see now is also I, the personality of Godhead, and after annihilation, what remains will also be I, the personality of Godhead. Please repeat the translation. Brahmā, it is I, the personality of Godhead, who is existing before the creation, when there was nothing but myself, nor was there the material nature, the cause of this creation. That which you see now is also I, the personality of Godhead. And after annihilation, what remains will also be I, the personality of Godhead. So now we're going to continue the purport from yesterday. The impersonalist adduces no activity in the Supreme. But in this discussion between Brahmā and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Lord is said to have activities also, as he has his form and quality. The activities of Brahmā and other demigods during the maintenance of the creation are to be understood as the activities of the Lord. The king, or the head executive of a state, may not be seen in the government offices, for he may be engaged in royal comforts. Yet it should be understood that everything is being done under his direction, and everything is at his command. The personality of Godhead is never formless. In the material world, he may not be visible in his personal form to the less intelligent class of men, and therefore he may sometimes be called formless. But actually, he is always in his eternal form, in his Vaikuntha planets, as well as in other planets of the universes as different incarnations. The example of the sun is very appropriate in this connection. The sun in the night may not be visible to the eyes of men in the darkness, but the sun is visible wherever it has risen. That the sun is not visible to the eyes of the inhabitants of a particular part of the earth does not mean that the sun has no form. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 141, there is the hymn Atmai Vedam Agra Asit Purusha Vidha. This mantra indicates the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, even before the appearance of the Purusha incarnation. In the Bhagavad Gita 15:18, it is said that Lord Krishna is Purushottam because he is the Supreme Person. He is the Supreme Purusha, transcendental even to the Purusha Akshara and the Purusha Kshara. The Akshara Purusha, or the Mahavishnu, throws his glance over Prakriti, or material nature, but the Purushottam existed even before that. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad therefore confirms the statement of Bhagavad Gita that Lord Krishna is the Supreme Person, Purushottama. In some of the Vedas it is also said, in the beginning, only the impersonal Brahman existed. However, according to this verse, the impersonal Brahman, which is the glowing effulgence of the Lord, of the body of the Supreme Lord, may be called the immediate cause. But the cause of all causes, or the remote cause, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Lord's impersonal feature is existent in the material world because, by material senses or material eyes, the Lord cannot be seen or perceived. One has to spiritualize the senses before one can expect to see or perceive the Supreme Lord. But he is always engaged in his personal capacity, and he is eternally visible to the inhabitants of Vaikuntha, eye to eye. Therefore, he is materially impersonal, just as the executive head of the state may be impersonal in the government offices, although he is not impersonal in the government house. Similarly, the Lord is not impersonal in his abode, which is always nirasta kuhakam, as stated in the very beginning of the Bhagavatam. Therefore, both the impersonal and personal features of the Lord are acceptable, as mentioned in the revealed scriptures. This personality of Godhead is very emphatically explained in the Bhagavad Gita in connection with the verse Brahmano hi pratishtaham, Bhagavad Gita 14:27. Therefore, in all ways, the confidential part of spiritual knowledge is realization of the personality of Godhead, and not his impersonal Brahman feature. One should therefore have this ultimate aim of realization, not in the impersonal feature, but in the personal feature of the absolute truth. The example of the sky within the pot and the sky outside the pot may be helpful to the student for his realization of the all-pervading quality of the cosmic consciousness of the absolute truth. But that does not mean that the individual part and parcel of the Lord becomes the supreme by false claim. It means only that the conditioned soul is a victim of the illusory energy in her last snare. The claim to be one with the cosmic consciousness of the Lord is the last trap set by the illusory energy, or Daivi Maya. Even in the impersonal existence of the Lord, as it is in the material creation, one should aspire for personal realization of the Lord. And that is the meaning of paścād aham yad etac chayo vaśiṣyeta aham. Brahmāji also accepted the same truth when he was instructing Narada. He said, Soyam te bitas patata bhagavan vishvabhavanaha. There is no other cause of all causes than the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari. Therefore, this verse, aham, eva, never indicates anything other than the Supreme Lord. One should therefore follow the path of the Brahmā Sampradaya, or the path from Brahmāji to Narada, to Vyasadeva, etc., and make it a point in life to realize the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari, or Lord Krishna. This very confidential instruction to the pure devotees of the Lord was also given to Arjuna and to Brahmā in the beginning of the creation. The demigods like Brahmā, Vishnu, Maheshwar, Indra, Chandra, and Varuna are undoubtedly different forms of the Lord for execution of different functions. The different elemental ingredients of material creation, as well as the multifarious energies, also may be of the same Supreme Personality of Godhead. But the root of all of them is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. One should be attached to the root of everything rather than bewildered by the branches and leaves. This is the instruction given in this verse. So we can see here that this is a verse where Prabhupada is strongly refuting the idea of impersonalism in Krishna consciousness. The impersonal tendency is really strong everywhere. We see in most of the religions of the world, even the religions that claim to be personalist, they actually have no idea who God is. But they can't tell you who God is. They wax lyrical, they speak very nicely about so many philosophical points, but when it comes down to where does he live, what's his name, what does he do, they can't say. And even some they explain that God is unknowable. The idea being that in our conditioned state, we're only aware of the things that we see in front of our eyes or the things that are immediately in front of our senses. And while you might be able to infer that there is a God, they don't deny that there is a God. They say, yes, there is a God, but he can never be known by us. And so therefore, we have to simply just do good things in the world and try to make the world a better place, because we can never know God. So it's a very rational approach. It's the modern approach, the scientific approach. Actually, we can understand that in many cases, these aspects of philosophy have been implanted, or how would you say? We know, for instance, that in the Christian church, the Bible has been rewritten many times. There was a famous conference in Constantinople where King Constantine had many scholars go over the Bible and rewrite it. And Constantine, as far as I remember, Constantine was the first Christian king. And we understand the principle, like Prabhupada had the same principle, that we should preach to the elite, we should preach to the upper classes of people, because if you can get someone from the upper classes to take to Krishna consciousness, then whatever the great man does, the common man will follow in his footsteps. In that way, if you can convince a head of state to take to Krishna consciousness, then he will automatically rule the state in a proper way, and the people will get a much better chance to engage in Krishna consciousness. So in Constantinople, the king, he became the first Christian king, but he saw the value of using religion to control the people. And so, as far as I'm aware, he introduced this idea that if you don't accept the Lord, then you will go to hell forever. This whole concept of eternal damnation, hellfire and brimstone, came from him, because then people become scared and they will take up the religion out of fear rather than out of love. So in that way, religion was made into a controlling feature of governance. And then later on, in the 20th century, there was this move to separate church and state, because it was seen that the church was misusing its power. But all they did was simply just transfer the misuse of the power from the church directly into the state without the need for religion. And ultimately, the most, how would you say, the most effective way of wielding power is to become the supreme authority. So get rid of God. We are the supreme authority. There's a story how in the Soviet Union, at a certain point, people were starving, and a truck full of bread rolls into a village, and the people in the truck, they say, "You want bread? Ask God for bread. Get on your knees and pray to God for bread." So they all get down on their knees and they start praying to God for bread, and no bread comes. And they say, so you see, you prayed to God, no bread came. Now pray to us for bread. So then they start praying to the soldiers for bread, and then they open the back of the truck and start distributing the bread. So you see, what is this faith in God? What does it get you? It gets you nowhere, useless. You should have faith in the communist system, and then we will supply everything you need. So like that, in modern society, atheism has come about. So yes, so basically, the modern system is based on empiricism and empiric study. There's this whole, like when these, like some of these faiths which say that God is unknowable, they're using this empiric system that we can only work with what we can see in front of us, what we can physically touch, what we can experiment with physically. That's all we can really say is a fact. And anything about some unseen God, how can you know, it's irrational. It's just a sentimental, emotional thing, and we have to be rational. This is the only way to move forward. So it's an empiric approach whereby using logic, reason, and argument, you can try to ascertain or impose a certain view of the world. And it's interesting because obviously one has to study. Srila Prabhupada wrote so many books, and he told us to study the books and to learn the philosophy of Krishna consciousness so that we can present it nicely. But we understand that simply studying is not enough, that it has to be combined with service. There is the example of Dhruva Maharaj, when he was meditating on the Lord, because he wanted to get a kingdom greater than his grandfather, Lord Brahmā. And so he was sitting down and meditating, and he had this form of the Lord in his mind. I guess he must have seen the deities or pictures, and he had this form in his mind that he was meditating on that form. And then at a certain point he opened his eyes, and when he opened his eyes, that form that he was in his mind was in exactly the same position in reality. And he was astonished. The Lord had suddenly appeared to him in his physical form. Of course, it's a spiritual form. And he was so overwhelmed, he wanted to offer prayers, but he was only a 5-year-old boy. He didn't have the ability to offer prayers. So the Lord comes to him, understanding his mind, touches his head with his conch shell, and immediately the knowledge of all these mantras and all these hymns and prayers became revealed to him, and he was able to very eloquently speak. So he had been doing his service. His seva was a mental seva, meditating on the Lord, crying to the Lord to please fulfill his desire, because his mother had told him the only way your desire is possible to be fulfilled will be if Lord Vishnu or Lord Krishna fulfills it for you. So you have to meditate on him. So he did that, and that was his service. And then because he had that attitude of pleading with the Lord, please, please, please help me, then the Lord gave him all the knowledge. So there's the danger of the empiric approach is very real. There was a story, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, after Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur had left, he was seeing how many of the followers of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, they had memorized the teachings of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He said they know how to quote chapter and verse very eloquently, but they haven't understood the least part of the meaning. And he warned that simply just this empiric approach, this empiric study, is not sufficient. I have a couple of quotes here. He says that there are persons who have got by heart almost everything that Bhaktivinoda wrote without being able to catch the least part. Such study cannot benefit those who are not prepared to follow the instructions clearly conveyed by his words. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur speaks about devotional service, engaging in the service of the Lord, and having that service attitude. And simply just cramming the verses and learning them by heart misses the point. And he says, the personal service of the pure devotee is essential for understanding the spiritual meaning of the words of Thakur Bhaktivinoda. And he was trying, this is coming from this journal that he used to write. Anyone remember the name? Sajjana Toshini, I think it was called. There's a journal that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta would write regularly. And he's explaining here how he's always trying to bring the attention to the followers of Bhaktivinoda Thakur that they don't have to try and make themselves equal to him, but they should engage instead in service. And in that way, don't be tricked by this empiric. The tendency is we learn verses and we learn the purports, and we can start to cross-reference purports and verses, and it appears that we're very knowledgeable, and then we can become very proud of my knowledge. Just see, I know how to cross-reference this and refer back to that and answer complicated questions on philosophy. So this is empiric knowledge, but it's not realized knowledge. So without the realized knowledge, it can be very misleading. So, and then, as Prabhupada mentions in the purport here, where is it? Therefore, in all ways, the confidential part of spiritual knowledge is realization of the personality of Godhead, and not his impersonal Brahman feature. So, this is the key, is that this knowledge is confidential. I'm not sure if I mentioned this before, but you know, in today's age, you can go online and you can download all the works of the previous acharyas, all the songs, all the, you know, Srimad Bhagavatam, everything is there. You don't even have to pay for it. You can get it all for free. So how is it confidential? It's all there. It's all written down in black and white. There's nothing, you know, everything that the acharyas have said, especially Srila Prabhupada, we have everything recorded, written down, and we have so many writings of Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. How is it confidential? But it's confidential because it's revealed knowledge. It comes from revelation, which comes from seva. Without seva, there will be no realization. So, such an important part. And Prabhupada is making this point here in this purport, the need to understand the difference between the personality of Godhead and the impersonal feature. Of course, we know Srila Prabhupada was very much who would you say, an advocate or a fierce advocate of destroying impersonalism, because it's so prevalent in this age. Even amongst devotees, our tendency is to be impersonal. It's just the way we've been educated. The whole Western educational system is designed to make us into automatons, where we just are, what's the word, conditioned for a life of seva, but not Krishna seva, corporate seva. You know, getting a good job. Here in India especially, to get a government service job is considered to be, you know, the ultimate. That because with a government service job, that's it. You're set up for life. You're never going to lose your job. You'll get your pay. You'll get moved around, transferred to different offices. I remember I went to, back in the 90s when we were starting to work on the town plan for Mayapur, I was sent to the Central Planning Office of West Bengal. It's a big, big government building. And I went into the main planning hall. It was a room about maybe twice the size of this. And it was full of drawing boards, which were all covered in white cloth. And there were a group of about 10 people drinking tea and reading the newspaper. And so I went to them and I said, look, we're trying to develop Mayapur. We want to develop a town plan, but we need help from professional town planners because it's quite complicated. There are things like sewage. How do you calculate how much sewage? How do you calculate services for so many people? How do you calculate area of built-up space? There are so many things which needed professional input. So I asked them, you know, can you help us? So they told us, there's been no planning in West Bengal for the last 20 years. And at that time, West Bengal was under the communist government, Jyoti Basu. He was the chief minister. And all the planners in India at that time had been trained in Soviet-style planning. And I don't know if any of you have been to the Soviet Union. Actually, Russia is very interesting because there are many beautiful cities, very old cities, St. Petersburg and Petrovsk and places like that, which are beautiful old cities. But the modern era, the Soviet era, they just built these huge concrete blocks and just miles and miles of concrete blocks, just impersonal, horrible. So, yeah, so these people, these planners hadn't done any, you know, this is basically what government service is. I went to get a visa in Writers' Building. I had to get a return visa, a special kind of ability. In those days, you had to get a return visa to go out and come back on the same visa. So I went into the office, and there's a man reading a newspaper, And I'm sitting for 15 minutes in front of him, and then he looks at me and says, yes. I said, I've come to do my visa work. He says, oh, okay. Carries on reading the newspaper. 20 minutes later, he says, go to room such and such. So they go to this next room, there's a man reading the newspaper. Everyone was reading the newspapers, and they'll spend 15 minutes reading before they'll look at you and say something, and then dismiss you off somewhere else. I spent all day walking from office to office. So this is the glory of government seva. You go to the FRO in Krishnanagar, you'll find stacks of papers from, probably 1800s of Bangladeshis and Pakistanis and people, foreigners, that probably they will never, once they put your name in that paper, it gets sealed up and they'll never look at it ever again. Government bureaucracy. So this is what we face, this kind of bureaucracy. And because of the educational system, everyone has become dumbed down. And this is why Gurukula was such an important system of education. I remember when I was about 12, in the UK, there was a TV program called Kung Fu. And it was about a small boy, a 12-year-old boy, same age as me, who was an orphan. And he had an American father and a Chinese mother. And they both died. And so he went to the Shaolin temple to try to become a monk in the temple. And for many days, there were a group of boys sitting outside the temple who would all come, been sent by their parents or whatever to become monks. And slowly, slowly, as the days go by, one of the monks will look out of the window, see the boys, say something to them, and then go away. So after so many days, one by one, boys going to go home. And towards the end, there's about 3 or 4 boys left. And it's pouring with rain, and still there's 3 or 4 boys left. So then the monk invites them inside to meet the chief priest. And so the boys come inside, and they're served some hot tea. And they're all sitting in a row. The priest is sitting here, the boys are sitting here. They serve some hot tea, and then as soon as the tea is served, the boys start to drink, except for one boy. So then the priest, the assistant priest, he says, okay, you boys go home, except you stay. And then the priest asks him, why you didn't drink the tea? And he says, oh, master, I could not drink the tea before you. That would be an offense. And then the priest says, yes, this is very good. Where have you learned your manners? He says, from my grandfather. He says, yes. So he's allowed to become a monk in the temple. And they're teaching Kung Fu. But Kung Fu is not just a martial art, it's a whole way of life, it's a whole approach to life. And the first rule of Kung Fu is to run away. Right? If you're faced with a threat, the first thing you should do is run away. And if you cannot avoid the fight, then you engage in the fight with such force that you finish it within seconds. So the first thing is to avoid fighting. It's not that Kung Fu is many young people, they want to learn Kung Fu so they can become a fighter and they can beat up all the people that bullied them and, just get revenge. That's not what it's about. It's all about, it's a Kshatriya art whereby you use diplomacy, just like the Pandavas used diplomacy. Again and again, they tried the diplomatic approach, until finally there was no choice than battle. So Kung Fu teaches the same thing, that, of course, Kung Fu actually comes from India. Originally, it was described that one monk came from India, and he traveled through the Oriental, through China and Japan, and this whole martial arts system actually came from this Indian monk. So we can understand that the roots of it came from India. And of course, it's the Kshatriya code, to protect. The Kshatriya's desire is not to fight, but to protect. And if protection means fighting, then he's willing to do it, more than happy. But the main thing is he cannot stand injustice. So this boy, he became known as Grasshopper, and he is living in the ashram of this temple, and he's observing the world. And for instance, at one point, he's sitting by a pond, and he has a stick. The stick is in the water, and when you look at the stick from outside, it appears to bend in the water. And he talks to the master. He says, "Master, what is this? Why is this stick appear to be bent?" And then he's explained to him all about apparent reality and actual reality, and the density of water and how light moves, and so many things like this. So that he's taught the nature of the material world and then the nature of illusion. So I remember seeing that and being so impressed. I just wanted to be like that boy. And I was just an English schoolboy, doomed to going to an English school and just wearing my English school clothes, school uniform. And I just so much wanted to be like that boy. And then of course I met the devotees when I was 16, and I was able to join the temple. And I wanted to come to Gurukul, but in those days, it was like, anybody that came, you were a resource. You were very valuable, to clean the pots or cut the vegetables or go on book distribution, whatever it was. So education is such an important part of preaching Krishna consciousness, because of this conditioning of the Western school system, it induces a kind of, it's impersonal, it's an impersonal system. I remember I went to, after seeing that TV series, I decided that I wanted to check out religion. And so I went to a church. I used to live in a little village, and there was a church about 10 minutes walk away. And so one Sunday I went to this church, and it was a very upper class church. It was all Mercedes cars and high class cars parked outside, and all these very well dressed people coming out from the sermon in the church. And I was a hippie. I had long hair down to here. I was wearing jeans and didn't look very reputable. And the people were looking at me like, what is this doing here? And I saw the priest. He was talking to some of these wealthy people, and he saw me coming, and he was like, oh my God, So finally I waited. I was polite. I waited for him to finish talking to whoever he was talking to. And when he'd finished, I came up to him and said, excuse me, sir, I would really like to talk to you. He said, what do you want to talk about? I said, well, I want to find out about God. What is God? Who is God? What happens when you die? And, I started to, ask him all this. I was genuinely wanting to find out. I'm according to my birth certificate, my religion was Church of England. Automatically, when you're born, they give you a category. So I was Church of England. So I thought, well, okay, that's where I should start looking. And he was like, yes, well, I'm busy now. Come back some other time. And I was like surprised, here he's a priest of the Lord, and I'm a person who genuinely wants to find out about God, and I'm just being fobbed off because he's embarrassed because I've got long hair, or maybe because I'm a hippie or something. So I thought, and I was thinking to myself, later on I thought, he probably saved me a lot of trouble. I didn't have to wade through the whole of Christianity before dismissing it. And of course, as I mentioned, nowadays what passes for Christianity is just a shadow of what the original teachings of Christ were. And we even understand that Christ was said to have been in India. He was said to, I think Prabhupada mentions it, that he was actually in Puri. And Prabhupada said that if Jesus Christ was in a temple in Puri, then he must have been a Vaishnava. You can't escape that conclusion. So, and we know that the early Christians were all vegetarian, and reincarnation was even part of Christianity. So, the Christianity and probably most of the modern religions, because they'd been co-opted by politics, became useless. So then I went and started looking for different forms. I came across a book by a person called T. Lobsang Rampa, and it was all about Tibetan mysticism. And it was very interesting. There was all about, Tibet is like this cut-off part up in the north of India, and they're all Zen Buddhists, and it sounded very interesting to me. But then I found out that this person, T. Lobsang Rampa, was actually the son of a carpenter or a plumber from England who claimed to have been possessed by the soul of a Tibetan monk. And he'd been to Tibet and learned something about Tibetans, and so he was able to write. Many people were very much fooled by his teachings. So, okay, I abandoned that. And then I met the devotees on the street. There was one devotee, African devotee, Jagat Bandhu. I met him, and he gave me a Back to Godhead magazine, and from that, it was all about, there were two main things in that magazine. One was about Gita Nagari, simple living and high thinking, Varnashram Dharma, and the other one was about vegetarianism. And as soon as I saw the vegetarian article, I realized that I have to become a vegetarian. I couldn't, it was just like when I realized that animals were dying so I could eat them, so I could just enjoy the taste, it just shocked me that this was going on, that I'd been doing this. And so I told my mother, you know, listen, I'm going to become a vegetarian. And so this devotee, he was preaching to me, and it was really enlivening. And he gave me this magazine, and I learned about the mantra and so many things. And then I was in the library, and I came across this book about Ramakrishna. And I thought, oh, it must be the same thing, Ramakrishna, Hare Krishna. You know, it's Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Ramakrishna, same thing. So I read this autobiography of Ramakrishna, or a biography, and he's talking about the Divine Mother, Kali Ma, and he's feeling ecstasies, just falling down in ecstasy, and I was thinking, wow, this is so far out, you know, I want that ecstasy. So when I was taking that book back to the library, I met another devotee on the street, and I was excited because I thought he'll be really, you know, impressed that I've got this book on Ramakrishna that I found by myself, you know. So I saw the devotee, he's standing there, he's looking into space. So I walked past him, and he didn't stop me. So then I was like, you know, I turned around, I went a respectable distance past him, I turned around and came back in the other direction, and walked past him, you know, like, here I am. And he still didn't stop me. He was just looking into space. So then I turned around, and I went a little further, and I came back again. About 4 times, I walked past him, because I was too embarrassed. I was only 15 or 14 or 15, something like that. I was too embarrassed to stop him myself, and I was used to them stopping you know, excuse me, sir, have you got a minute, you know? But he wasn't, and later on I realized, you know, he was one of these book distributors that was going through a moment of illusion where probably no one was stopping, and he was thinking, you know, what am I doing here on the street? So finally, after the 4th or 5th time of walking past him, he stopped me. Excuse me, sir. I was like, oh, at last. So then he shows me his magazine. I said, yeah, that's really good. I said, look what I've got. You know, this is a book on Ramakrishna. And he looked at it and he said, that guy, he said, that's a complete waste of time. You don't want to read that. He said, this guy's just an impersonalist. You know, it's just a waste of your time. Don't, you know, and I was like quite upset, you know, because I thought I really had it, you know. So anyway, I took that book back, and he gave me another book, another Back to Godhead, I think. And then I came across the Isha in a bookshop. So I bought that, but it was very hard. It was very deep, very hard for me to understand that. So I kind of like, And then I kept on bumping into devotees in different places. And then finally I met a devotee, his name's Kripa Moya. He's now a guru in England, but he was 2 years older than me. He was like 19 or 18. And he said to me, you know, you should come to the manor. And he gave me a book, Easy Journey to Other Planets. And then I read that book, and I just couldn't put it down. That was just amazing. Because in those days, when I was about 10, it was when they landed on the moon, or supposedly. And so all the newspapers were full of articles about the moon landing, lots of magazine articles. So I collected everything, cut it out, had a big scrapbook, everything about traveling in space, I had it in there. And then when Easy Journey to Other Planets came out, I was like, wow, you know, this is amazing. So I started reading it, and Prabhupada was so expert. He knew how people were so caught up in this whole moon, lunar, Apollo program, going to Mars, going to the moon, what, you know, the sky is the limit, as they would say. And he utilized that interest in cosmic travel to basically dismiss the whole idea, saying that, you know, yeah, you can build a vehicle, but but you can't enter into it. And he would describe how the moon is like a heavenly planet, and how in order to go to the moon, you actually have to have the adhikar, you have to have the qualification, the quality to be accepted as a citizen of that place. And also because of the fact that, just like he described the sun, there are people live on the sun. It's a heavenly realm. And so, it's like, you're going to get burnt if you go there. But no, because they have fiery bodies. Their bodies are made of that element. So the same thing with the moon, they have ethereal bodies, lunar bodies. Of course, when we look at the moon, it looks barren, but Prabhupada described that actually it's a heavenly planet. It's full of beautiful gardens and parks. So you have to become qualified to go to those places. So education is such an important part that when you're growing up, you understand what is the actual importance of human life. What are the important aspects of life? What should we be learning? And combining that learning, because it's known that up to the age of 12 years old, children are expert at memorizing. Memorizing is easy. You can memorize anything. When I moved to Spain with my son when he was 6, and we went to New Vrajamandala farm, and within 3 months my son was speaking fluent kid Spanish. Just playing with the other kids, moving around with toys and things like that, within 3 months he picked it up. Children just pick these things up really easily. So that's why in the beginning in Gurukula, they learn the mantras. And they pick up the mantras. I can see now the boys are regularly doing the mantras. When I came to Gurukula, I was, I think, 47 years old. And I decided to go for the mantra class. And for 3 years running, I was in the same mantra class, and I still couldn't, get it. But these boys, within 6 months, they've just got it down, down, down. And then when they become beyond 12, 13, 14, they can start to appreciate the philosophy. That's when you teach them what the mantras mean. In the beginning, you just teach the mantra, and they memorize it, and then they know it fully. And then later on, they go back and revise, and what do those mantras mean? And then by that stage, the brain has developed enough to actually understand philosophy. And so along with learning the mantras, learning the philosophy, then there's also the seva. And, sometimes children are children, and sometimes people have this illusion that devotee kids should be like little demigods, But kids are kids. They do naughty things. Even Prabhupada was naughty, right? He wanted 2 guns, and he would throw tantrums. They had to employ someone to drag him to school because he wouldn't go. And Prabhupada said that naughtiness is a sign of intelligence. So boys will be naughty. So what do? You're not supposed to beat them. That's forbidden. Prabhupada said you should show the stick. So what do? You give them service which makes them think, contemplate. Same thing I saw in the Shaolin temple. They would do this like this. So in Gurukul we have many little stones, like gravel pathways. So if a boy becomes too misbehaved, then he's given a bucket and some water, and he cleans the stones. It's very effective. After 3 days of cleaning stones, it somehow or another manages to change his mentality, and he may be more receptive and more reciprocal in his, and behave the way he's supposed to behave. Because the whole idea is to think about it. What did I do? I did something wrong. I was thoughtless. The consequence was somebody suffered or some bad result was there. Why? Philosophically, what happened? So we take the trouble to explain to them, if you carry on like this will be the result. So think about it. So they spend some time, they contemplate, they think about it, and then they realize. Unless it's realized knowledge, it won't have any effect. There's a saying, one convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. If someone has a strong opinion, then no matter how much you try to convince them that you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. They may go, okay, but they're not convinced. So contemplation is such an important part of education, to understand, think it through. Why is something a good behavior and why is something a bad behavior? What is the practical reality of that? So Prabhupada's mission was to destroy this whole impersonal feature, which is just everywhere, even amongst the main religions, basically just impersonalists. And of course, he was so kind that he gave us the deity forms for us to actually physically engage in activity. And it's interesting because some of these religions, they are against idol worship. They say, who can, graven images, some speculative image of God, this is complete blasphemy because God is unknowable. You can't know him. So how can you pretend to know him and then bow down and worship this form? Idolaters should be killed. So, but actually, because it's realized knowledge, it's all about realization, it's all about engaging in seva and then getting realization in the heart. These images of the Lord are authorized images from persons who have actually seen eye to eye, as Prabhupada describes in the purport here. Eye to eye, they've actually seen the Lord. They know what he looks like. And so they are fit to give us this representation. So this was Prabhupada's mission, to destroy this impersonalism and establish the personality of Godhead. In London, when he found Shri Radha Gokulananda, some life members they were just some Hindu temple. They had these deities, and somehow or another they contacted Prabhupada and said, we'd like to donate these to the temple. And so Prabhupada went to see Radha Gokulananda, and then so he went into their place and they unveiled them, and immediately Prabhupada folded his hands. And then slowly he was talking with them, and he said to the devotees, just pick up the deity to see how heavy he is, and then he told the other devotee, pick up, and then he said, yes, thank you, we will take them. And they just walked out, and the devotees, these people were like, what's up? They were obviously angling. I don't know if they wanted a donation or what, somehow or another, but he just took the deities, and as soon as he put the deities in the van, they were in the back of the van, immediately he said, stop, and he turned around and offered these prayers to the deities, my Lord, please thank you for coming to us. And then he told the devotees, he made such strong standards for deity worship, and we have our deity worship minister here who's kindly upholding these standards, that you need to have 6 pujaris minimum for worshipping Radha Krishna, and that you should understand that the Lord has come to you to help you. Now you must serve him to your best capacity. There's no question of any kind of neglect. This is the greatest responsibility. So Prabhupada instilled that in us. This personal feature of the personality of Godhead in the Hare Krishna movement. So I'll end there. Any questions? Yes.
Haribol. This is from Islam. If God has a form, then he cannot be unlimited, because a form is a limitation. So how can we say that God is limitless and has a form?
Well, because if you're trying to say that he doesn't have a form, then you're limiting him. So he has both. He has form and formless, as explained here in the purport. He has both an impersonal aspect, which for the unintelligent people, you can see. I mean, even just by by empiric study, many scientists have come to the conclusion that there is a God, because there's no way the material creation could have come about by itself. Even evolution, like the state between the condition of having an eye and not having an eye. They say with evolution that, say, a fish goes onto the beach and uses his flippers, and the flippers slowly develop into hands or legs or feet. And so this is how things evolve. But there's no state between an eye and a no eye. There's no useful stage between not having an eye and having an eye to explain how evolution. So anyone who's studied evolution, those who are really honest, they can see that there is actually a divine intelligence behind it. So to say that the God has no form is also limiting him. He has both. He's simultaneous, achintya bheda bheda tattva. He has both form and no form. And the interesting thing, we were reading the other day in Krishna book, Krishna lives in 16,108 palaces in Dwarka, right? And in each palace he's there personally. In one palace he's sitting with Rukmini, in another palace he's sitting with another queen, in another palace he's talking with somebody. And then every morning, after breakfast, I assume, he walks to his assembly house. And there's only one assembly house. So 16,108 Krishnas leave the front door, and as they get closer to the assembly house, they start merging. I mean, who knows? I would imagine that you can't actually perceive anything happening. Anyone who sees would just see one Krishna. But that's the description. 16,108 Krishnas leave their palaces and they go to the assembly house. So what to speak of limitation? The Lord is in each one of our hearts individually, right? He can have a relationship with every single one of us individually, having our own individual conversations and reciprocations. This is the amazing thing about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's just unlimited. So they pour fund of knowledge. They have one kind of very meager understanding, and they try to say that therefore God is, you can't limit him to a form. But actually, we see from the universal form that form can take so many amazing apparitions, both terrifying and at the same time also, just like when Mother Yashoda looks into his mouth. She's a lovely little baby Krishna there, and she looks into his mouth and she sees all the universes. How bewildering. So this is the amazing, unlimited power of the Personality of Godhead. Okay, one more question.
Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he begins his comments to the Premanjana Charita verse in the Brahma Samhita by saying, the Shyama Sundara form of Krishna is a simultaneously personal and impersonal, self-contradictory form.
Right.
He calls it the self-contradictory form.
Right.
I think the problem that happens in theology is, if God has a form, then what about everything outside of him? But that, as you said in Mother Yashoda, when she sees when she asks Krishna to open his mouth, so she sees that whatever is outside of him is also within him.
Right.
So in that sense, we have some resolution to that problem.
Sure, yeah. And they say, what is it? There's something that Krishna can't do. If there's nothing that Krishna can't do, then how is he God? And then the whole idea is, if there's something he can't do it, and then he will do it. He solves the problem. So his contradictory, self-contradictory, is always resolved. He always resolves the contradictions, just unlimitedly. It's amazing. Okay, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaura Premanandi.